Hello, everyone. It's me, NormMacdonald, and I'm delighted to be on the computer, inside the computer, and talking to you at USA Today Facebook chat. All right, so they have asked me to read a passage from my new book, Norm MacDonald, based on a true story, a memoir. So I have chosen, when you are a celebrity, you are asked to do many things. One of which is to meet terminally ill children. And I went and met one that had to make a wish. And his wish was to kill a baby seal. So I took him to Labrador, and we found a baby seal, and by God, we killed it. I mean, he killed it. And the boy, it was pretty amazing. He made an incredible recovery that startled all his doctors. But unfortunately, a year later, he was struck and killed while he tried to cross the street on Fifth Avenue in New York City by a bus, by a municipal bus, by a city bus, by a bus of New York City, by a bus of one of the boroughs of New York City, specifically the borough of Manhattan. So anyways, this is a chapter called A Tiny White Coffin. I named it that because I remember seeing an image of a tiny white coffin once, and it struck me as the saddest image I had ever seen. So this is called Tiny White Coffin when I went to the boy's funeral. The boy had turned 10 years old only a few days before the accident, and now he lay in Strickland's funeral home in a tiny white coffin. When all the strangers had finished looking at him and sadly shaking their heads so that all present knew their feelings on the matter, his mother was left alone in the room with the tiny white coffin. Alone but for me. I lingered behind, unseen, while the funeral director shooed the others into the room with a sad-faced pastor who was preparing to speak. The mother stood and looked into the tiny white coffin. Her posture, which had been rigid all morning, went slack at the shoulders and neck. Her hands remained clasped tightly in front of her. The boy was wearing a navy blue suit with a white shirt and a tie, but he still did not look like a man. I stayed quiet in the shadows so as not to disturb the moment. After a time had passed, the funeral director opened the door and quietly let the mother know that her time was up. As she turned to leave, she looked one last time into the tiny white coffin. And then she did a strange thing, a thing I shall never forget. She straightened the knot on the boy's tie and looked to make sure it was just right. I took in a fast, jagged gulp of air and slunk into the next room before she noticed me. There were cookies and an urn of coffee on a table in the other room. The cookies were awful. None of the cookies contained jelly in the middle, which are widely considered to be the best funeral home cookies. There were only dry shortbreads. The coffee was black, and there was no cream or milk, just packets of white yellow powder. When I poured the powder into the styrofoam cup of black bitter coffee, it just sat in a pile on top. When I mixed the powder in with a black plastic stick, the coffee turned gray like dishwater. Got me pretty steamed. I'm pretty sure the rest of the people who gathered there felt the same way as me. We all went into the adjoining room and took our seats. The tiny white coffin had been placed in the front of the room, and the sad-faced pastor was standing beside it. The sad-faced pastor told us how the boy had not been an ordinary boy. He had been very special. He had been a brother and a son and a grandson and even a great-grandson. I looked over and saw them sitting there, the young and the old and the older and the oldest. The sad-faced pastor told us he told us that some things were very mysterious, but that there was a meaning behind everything, even something as tragic as this. He then asked if anyone had anything they would like to say, and people came up one at a time to speak about the boy. I decided to go up and speak too, since I had appearance in public speaking. Of course, I wasn't about to do my stand-up. That would be ridiculous. I pulled out the piece of paper with a speech I had prepared, and then, when I was about to read it, I suddenly changed my mind. Folks, I said, I have in my hand here a speech. I wrote it, and it's full of big, fancy words, but I'm not going to read it. And I crumpled up my speech and threw it to the floor with contempt. I said, you don't want to hear a bunch of fancy words, many of them so fancy you won't even know what they mean. Instead, I will speak from the heart. I have never done such a thing before, but I hear it can be quite effective. So, ladies and gentlemen, bereaved relatives, youngsters who have lost a brother or sister or a friend much too soon, the guy in the sad-faced pastor costume, the lady sitting beside him, I figure it's his wife, and finally, of course, the guy hanging around at the door wearing a Carolina Panthers jacket, who is clearly in the wrong room, but has the grace to hang in there till the end. I thank you all for coming. I was proud to have known this boy, and I was proud that his last wish in life was to see me do a sketch on a Saturday Night Live TV program. Although I cannot say I was all that surprised, I'm a very good sketch player. But this is not about me. I really shouldn't be making it about me. But this is the first time I have ever spoken from the heart, so I beg your indulgence. I feel this speech will really start to get good very soon. But it didn't. And I realized something during the next 20 minutes as my speech moved from one inane anecdote to another, none of them having anything to do with the boy. What I realized then was that some guys are very good at speaking from the heart, and some guys aren't. It doesn't mean one guy's better than the other, just different. So I was honest with the people. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, I apologize for this speech. For the last 5 or 6 minutes, I've been telling you about Gordie Howe. And I think we realize what an awful, awful mistake me speaking from the heart was. So, if I may ask your help, let's try to find that speech with the big fancy words in it that I threw away some minutes ago. It's got to be around here somewhere. Here it is, a sweet old lady near the front said, I read it and thought it was very good, she said, especially the part about how we can learn more from the children than they can learn from us. Oh, excellent, I said. I'm glad you like that part because it's the surprise ending. So that's shot. Well, I guess I'll have to read it without the surprise ending. And also there appears to be coffee spilled all over it. Oh, yes, the sweet old lady said. I spilled coffee all over the darn thing. Okay. Well, I can't make out any of the big fancy words now at all, but it's nobody's fault. I mean, in all fairness, I suppose part of it is my fault for crumpling it up and tossing it away so cavalierly. You know, I think cavalierly may have been one of those big fancy words. Also, it's partly the sweet old lady's fault for spilling so much coffee on the paper that not a single word can be made out. But we're not here to place blame. I will say this about the young boy in the tiny white coffin. Despite the doctor's dire predictions, the boy was too tough, too resolute, too courageous to let something as small as a deadly disease defeat him. No, the boy was made of stronger stuff than that. And it took much more than that to defeat him. It took a 3-ton municipal bus moving at 40 miles per hour and driven by one Cecil Richard Anderson to defeat this boy. I heard the deepest of sobs and looked down to see a man wearing some sort of bus driver's uniform being held up by 2 women. If you cry, sir, I said, then cry with envy, not pity. For the boy is in the clouds, and he is one with the clouds. The clouds were a big thing with me and the boy, because when we had been in the Arctic, I had looked with the boy at the clouds, and we had found in the clouds different things. One time I found a pickle. I said, look, that cloud looks like a pickle. And then he said, look, that cloud looks like an old man. And I said, why? And he said, look, can't you see his chin? And I said, yes, I can see his chin. And he said, look, there's his nose. And then I saw it. There was his nose. And then for hours and hours, when we were on the boat in the Arctic, we looked up at the white clouds in the white, limitless sky, and we saw all sorts of things, from peanut butter cups to pickles to rodents. Anyways, it is we, I said, who are left, who are reminded on this unacceptable day that life is swift, and yet we are blind to its mighty splendor, which can be found in the simplest of things. Things like a walk in the park. Things like a conversation with a good friend. Things like a deep, rich coffee, leavened with half cream and half milk, and served in a sturdy mug. One with some heft, and with it a delicious cookie that's white and has red jelly in the middle. Thank you for listening, and due to the solemnity of this occasion, I would ask you to hold your applause. From there, we all went to the graveyard. The day was bright and clean and cool and filled my lungs and made me feel healthy. A time passed, and then the hearse showed up. The pallbearers were all big men, and they carried the tiny white coffin as if it were very heavy, although it could not have weighed more than 80 or 90 pounds. There was a small hole in the ground and some dirt beside it. You could tell that the grave diggers had not broken a sweat. We stood in a circle, and the sad-faced pastor said some things in Latin, and then we formed a line. The sun was directly overhead and made the tiny white coffin ever so bright. And I took a handful of dirt and flung it down on top. Then it was the next guy's turn. Afterward, I walked back alone down a long blacktop road, and it was cold, and in the sky there were white clouds, and all of them looked like white clouds and nothing else. And that is my chapter called The Tiny White Coffin, part of my book based on a true story, a memoir. And now we will be taking some questions. The girl that will be giving me the questions is named Lauren, isn't it?
Andrea. Very close.
Yes, exactly, Andrea. So Andrea will be taking your questions, passing them on to me. She's not on the computer. She's just she's just behind the computer and to the right. And then you will be asking the question. You just ask the questions to me on the computer. Andrea will be passing them on to me. So, first question.
First question.
First question.
Norm MacDonald, how did you decide what to reveal and what to fictionalize in your new memoir, and why not go the route of pure confessional?
Oh, that's a very excellent question. Who asked it, Andrea?
USA Today asked that question.
USA Today asked the question. So no one is on this except you. Is that what you're saying?
We've got many questions coming in. We just wanted to launch
USA
with
Today.
the number one question about the book.
Well, USA Today, that's an excellent question. Why did I make it half fiction and half truth? Well, first of all, I feel that there is no such thing as an actual true story because of memory. It's no good. It's faulty. It's broken. And so it's like when someone tells a story about you, and they go, and you're in the story, you know, and they go, oh, remember that time you caught that big fish? And then you're like, wait, I've never fished in my life. And they're like, yeah, no, it was a big fish and we ate it. And you go, wait a minute, I've never been even on a boat. And so, and then you go, wait a minute, maybe I did fish. Maybe my memory is no good. So I realized that memory was no good. Then the other thing was I wanted to tell actual true stories, but I was afraid of being sued. And so I thought if I said actual true things, but I surrounded them by fantasizing, fantasist ramblings, then I could not be sued, because if somebody said, wait a minute, I never did that, I go, well, it's just a stupid book. I mean, there's a tiny white cough in it. What do you think? So that's my answer to you, USA Today.
Curtis Shaw has a question
Curtis Shaw.
on Facebook. What's the coolest gift you've received from a fan?
The coolest gift I've ever received from a fan, Curtis Shaw. It's an interesting question, because I've received so few gifts from fans. Fans, I find, to usually be an unappreciative lot. I'll do my stand-up comedy, and they'll come to me afterward with all kinds of requests, to take pictures with them, to phone their friends and to make fun of their friends on the phone, to make an answering machine message for them. And yet, what do they give me? Nothing. Nothing at all. I'm sorry, Curtis. I wish it were different.
We have a question from
Yes.
Joe Carty from Manchester, England.
Manchester, England.
Manchester, England.
It just shows you the computer exists everywhere, all over the world, even in the coal mining district of Manchester, England. Well, Joe, what's his name?
Joe Carty.
Joe Carty.
Can you remember the first person or comedian to make you cry with laughter?
Joe Carty asks me, do I remember the first comedian who makes me cry with laughter? Well, this is going to be a rather cliche answer, and yet it is true. The first comedian to ever make me cry with laughter was Bob Hope, and it was in a movie that I watched when I was a young boy called Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, The Road to Bali. And at the end, what was funny about it was that they were friends, but they would just do anything to each other to get the girl. So they're both trying to get Dorothy Lamour, Joe. So Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour at the end of the movie are in the Arctic Circle on a big giant bluff of snow, and Bob Hope, when he's not looking, Jack Benny kicks Bob Hope down into the chasm to his death. And then it cuts to 20 years later, and Dorothy Lamour and Bing Crosby are in their house in a suburb somewhere, maybe in Manchester. It doesn't really say. And it says 20 years later, and the door knocks, and it's Bob Hope. He has survived being kicked into the chasm, but he's frozen, like there's icicles coming off his ski nose and stuff like that. So you can tell he's very cold. And he comes in, and he's like, "Hi, Pally," and he doesn't realize that he thought it was all a mistake. He didn't realize that Jack Benny had kicked him off. So Jack Benny goes, well, hi, come on in. He and Dorothy Lamour have a little family now. And the sun comes down, and the sun looks exactly like Bob Hope. And that's when I really laughed hard. And then Jack Benny goes to not Jack Benny, Bing Crosby goes close to the camera. He goes, "We adopted." So that was the first time I ever laughed really hard at a comedian, Joe. And it was one of your countrymen, Leslie Towns Hope.
You open the book with a death hoax made about you, which made us wonder, what's your favorite rumor about yourself you've ever heard?
Wait, who asked this?
That's a USA Today question.
USA Today is kind of hogging all the questions.
We're volleying back and forth.
Well, USA Today, so you ask me what is the favorite rumor about me, and yet I don't think there's ever been a rumor about me. So it's very hard to pick a favorite. when none exist. Did any ever exist? Nope.
We have a question from Max McNabb.
Max McNabb.
When Bob Dylan...
Where's he from?
I'm not sure, actually.
Oh well. Max McNabb from just
From
a
Facebook.
drifter.
Yes. When
Lonesome drifter.
When Bob Dylan told you most writers are really stenographers, what did he mean? I'm writing a novel, and I'd love to know the answer.
Oh, well, you're writing a novel. Well, I'm not sure when Bob when Bob Dylan says that most writers are stenographers, what he means is that they write in a journalistic fashion, that they write facts. If you were to take a tape recorder, for instance, and tape everyone and then listen to it, would you be great at writing dialogue? No, you would be terrible at writing dialogue, because things that are taped sound nothing like the truth. They just sound like facts. So, for instance, if you listen to the presidential tapes in the Nixon book that were just released, it's very hard to follow because people overlap dialogue, they don't listen to each other. That's the reality of life and conversations. So what he was saying, Bob Dylan, is that you shouldn't try to reach for verisimilitude in your writing. You have to write at a more rarefied air, at what people mean to say rather than what they say. And that's what I believe he meant when he said that most writers are stenographers. You know, he said somewhat contemptuously, and that artists are not.
We have a question from Tim Horst.
Tim Horst.
Yes. Who is your favorite
Where
young...
is he from?
Unclear.
Okay.
They don't all say. Who is your favorite young comedian, 35 or younger, and why?
35 years or younger? Well, the problem is a comedian doesn't get good, Tim, until he's older than that, usually early 40s, because it takes you about 20 years to get very good. There's a comedian named Sean O'Connors, who's 30 years old, and he will be the future of comedy. He is bright and sharp, and he may be stopping stand-up, unfortunately, to create animated shows and such. But had he stayed, or if he stays in stand-up comedy, and his animated shows don't connect, then I believe he would be the future of stand-up comedy.
Our next question comes from Fraz Khan.
Raz?
Fraz.
Khan.
Khan.
Raz?
F-R-A-A-Z.
What? Fraud?
Fraz.
Fraz?
Khan.
Fraz Khan. And where's Fraz from?
Not sure.
It's got to be some exotic place. We'll make it up.
What does Letterman say to you when he's shaking...
Liberia. Fraz Khan from Liberia.
What does Letterman say to you when he's shaking your hand before you sit down for the interview? And also, will you be on Conan anytime soon? Often,
David Letterman, when I come out and he shakes my hand, he'll whisper in my ear, "Why didn't you wear a tie?" And I always forget to wear a tie on the David Letterman show. And then usually the first half of the segment is him asking me why I don't have a tie on, and then at the break he'll get me one of his ties and I will wear it. And there was a second part of the question, Fraz Khan?
The second part of the question...
Fraz Khan was a character in the
Conan?
Jungle Book, I believe.
Will you be on Conan anytime soon?
Will I be on Conan anytime soon? Well, the answer to that, Fraz Khan, this sounds more like a Bagheera question, but the answer is I will be on Conan in 2 weeks, in a fortnight. I say that for Max, or Max from Manchester. A fortnight.
Next question is a USA Today question.
Question from a newspaper.
Yes.
The USA Today.
Did you have a burning joke after the first presidential debate on Monday, and what are your thoughts on Trump and Clinton?
Did I have a burning joke after the first debate on Monday? And what do I think of Trump and Clinton? No, a joke did not occur to me watching that debate. The oddest thing I noticed, and you tell me, USA Today, if you didn't notice, and here we have two people on the stage debating each other, both at podiums, and yet the entire debate is shot on split screen. Now, why do you suppose that is? Well, I believe the reason was that it would make the height of Hillary Clinton and the height of Donald Trump equal. So it would distort reality. Hillary Clinton had asked for a giant box to stand on, so she would be the same size as Donald Trump. But the debate people said, well, that's ridiculous. So then, secretly, without anybody ever telling us, or any of the moderators or pundits pointing it out, they found a way to make Hillary Clinton the equal size and girth of Donald Trump, which I feel is unfair to the American viewer, because what if the person wants to vote for the tallest guy? So a lot of people, first of all, this is the only election where there's only one guy running. This never happened before. But many people will vote on height. You know, some people are one issue voters, and so I think it's a little unfair.
Our next question comes from Jamie Jimenez.
Jamie Jimenez.
Do you keep in touch with Artie Lang, and do you ever consider Dirty Work 2?
Well, Jamie was asking me if I keep in touch with Artie Lang and what I thought of Dirty Work 2. It's odd because I was going to shoot a message out to Artie. I haven't talked to Artie in quite a while. It's just as things go. I'm on the West Coast and he's on the East Coast, and we haven't seen each other in quite a while. But I was when I was in New York, I thought of seeing him rather, but I was so busy with this sort of nonsense I'm doing now, being in a computer and such, that I couldn't make human contact because I was part of this preposterous gadgetry that you're now seeing me on. But as for Dirty Work 2, we have thrown around a few ideas for the film idea, because the first film didn't work at the box office. It didn't make money. However, a lot of people watched it afterwards, and so they think a second film would do very well because of all the people that had seen the first film on, like Zoolander. I hope that answers your question. Was that Frozen?
That was from Jamie.
Oh, Jamie. I'm sorry, Jamie.
We have another question from John McClanahan, who really wants me to ask, any good stories from pitching the Who's More Grizzled sketch to Robert Duvall and Garth Brooks?
Well, John, was that his name?
John McClanahan.
Yes, John McClanahan. You asked me about the sketch Who's More Grizzled. And this was the last sketch I ever performed on Saturday Night Live. And it was with a hero of mine, Robert Duvall, and Garth Brooks, who was the host. And Robert Duvall had just showed up. And I have no story about pitching it because I did not write that sketch. It was written by the legendary Adam McKay, and it was a brilliant sketch. But I will say this. Robert Duvall, who is my hero, and I spent most of my time that week with him, was going to do a country song, an old country song, a Lefty Frizzell song. And he was going to do it with Garth Brooks. And, you know, Garth Brooks does this new country where he yells into a mic that's strapped into his head like that, you know, a Bluetooth, I think they call it. And it's kind of, you know, it's not good in any way. But it would have been fantastic to see Garth Brooks sitting on a chair across from Robert Duvall, who is a great country singer. And if you've never seen Tender Mercies, do yourself a favor, John McClanahan, and go and get a DVD of Tender Mercies. Then try to find a DVD player, and then put it in the player. Try to hook it up to your TV somehow and watch it, because in it Robert Duvall sings.
We have a question from very close, very
Question
nearby.
from very close.
From Michael Kofsky.
Oh, from Michael, right over there, who's right to my left.
How does the massive amount of stand-ups coming to Netflix affect the stand-up comedy landscape?
How do the massive amounts of stand-up comedy specials?
Yeah, coming to Netflix.
Oh, the question from Michael is, how do the massive amounts... Wait, say the question one more time.
How do all the specials coming to Netflix affect the comedy landscape, the stand-up comedy
Oh, I got
landscape?
it. How do the massive amounts of comedy specials that come to Netflix affect the comedy landscape? Well, here's the problem. There's a big comedy boom coming along right now. At one point, 10 years ago, there was probably 500 comics, and there was probably 5 good ones. Well, now there's 50,000 comics, but there's still only 5 good ones. So the problem with demand, it doesn't work with supply and demand, not with something like comedy, not with any type of art, really. Nowadays, because of such nonsense as the nonsense that you're witnessing right now, the computer demands content, demands it. So, and it consumes it at a large rate. And so, if you are to be successful, you are to feed this gluttonous beast with everything that you have. You're to do 2 specials a year, 3 specials a year. That will be the future. People will do 3, 4 specials a year. Those will be the popular people because of the appetite, the voracious, impossible to satiate appetite of things like Netflix and of things like the computer, which you're watching right now. It's bad. It's bad for the comedy landscape. Bad.
Tanner Hauer.
Tanner Howard. Wow.
Yes, Hauer.
Sounds like a TV show.
Wants to know, any plans in the works for a new comedy TV series, and what kind of show would you want to do?
Well, Tanner Howard, who asks, is there any, what?
Plans in the works.
Is there any plans in the work for a new TV series? And if so, what exactly would that be? Well, I have a few ideas. I'm going to do I'm actually doing a special on Netflix. I just remembered. But it's only my 2nd special ever. And I believe maybe I'll do one more after that. Because, Richard Pryor only did 3, and even the 3rd one wasn't that good. So, and he was the best ever. So you don't have that many specials in you. But as for comedy, television shows, I have a deal right now with Netflix that's exclusive, so I can't do anything outside of Netflix. But I am going to pitch a show to Netflix. And it's interesting, Conrad Hauer, what was his name?
Tanner Hauer.
Oh, that's a Tanner Howard. It's interesting how it works, because when you pitch a show to Netflix, it's all different than if you pitch a show to a network. If you pitch a show to a network, you go, okay, here's the idea. It's me and Bruce Boxleitner, and we're prison escapees. And escapers, actually, is the word. Prison escapers. And the police are chasing us, and we have a pet stork. And then they give you a lot of money, and you go and you write a bad pilot, and it never goes anywhere. But on Netflix, it's different. You pick how many shows you want, 6, 10, 13, and then you outline every single episode. Now, that's a very good idea because, first of all, it makes you understand whether your show has legs or not, whether it can actually contend on the 6th episode, on the 8th episode, on the 10th episode. Because a pilot's easy to write, but the 50th episode is a little harder. So, so I'm looking into writing something for Netflix, and you keep watching your Netflix, and I'll be on it.
Paul Harmon is jumping on that question. He says, you currently only have one stand-up album, Me Doing Stand-Up, which is one of the best stand-up albums of all time. Why only one? Can we please get another one out of you sometime soon?
Paul Harmon. Well, I've answered your question, Paul. I guess you weren't listening, but it's very kind of you to say that Me Doing Stand-Up is one of the best specials of all time, and it's accurate. But I will be doing a second one that would be better than the first one, and I don't know what I'll call it. I was thinking of calling it Me Again, Doing Stand-Up Again. It's going to be on Netflix. I'm taping it in January at the Wilbur Theater, where my manager made a deal where I have to pay for my hotel room, but he gets his hotel room for free.
Shane Pyle wants to know...
Shane Pyle.
Yes, which section of the book was the hardest to write?
Shane Pyle asks which section of the book was the hardest to write. Well, for me it was the end, because at the end I had to sum up my life, because it was an autobiography after all, and as Socrates said, a life unexamined is one not worth living. And so it's very difficult to look at your life, Shane. You don't want to look at it too close, because you start to flinch, because mortality always becomes an issue. But I guess the hardest was to look back, through the regrets, the remorse, the kindness, the happiness, and the despair, and to somehow wrap it up as to what was important and what was not. And I did that in the last chapter of the book. That would be the hardest chapter I had to read, the hardest section, as you called it.
Sunjay Sethi wants to know what your favorite book is.
Sunjay Sethi asks, what is my favorite book? Well, it's interesting because it's a book that Diana is reading right now. Diana is a girl that's sitting over, she's not on the computer, but she exists to my immediate right and deep. And the book is War and Peace. Again, it may sound like a cliche answer, but it is the best book ever written. And Leo Tolstoy is the greatest writer ever, and this, of course, is his masterpiece. Although Tolstoy himself described War and Peace as not a novel. He said Anna Karenina was the novel. And if that is true, then Anna Karenina is the best novel, and War and Peace is some other next level piece of work. But it's a book. I also like the book of Job from the Holy Bible.
This is a USA Today question. Based on a true story, O.J. Simpson somewhat fictionally enters your retelling of the day you were fired from SNL. How do you feel about O.J. dominating pop culture again in 2016?
Yes, well, USA Today. The question was about O.J. Simpson and how he's back in the news because Karaszewski and his partner, Alexander and Karaszewski. How did you know that? Alexander and Karaszewski did their fictionalized biopic, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. That was on Netflix. No, it was on FX. And and then that was followed immediately by a 30 for 30 documentary on the O.J. case. So people who didn't know about it, like my son watched it, and he was like, I wonder what'll happen next. It was very exciting for him, And but for us that were older, we knew most of the stuff. But he's back, and he might get out soon also, because also I think it's very unfair that O.J. Simpson is in prison for stealing his own shirts off a guy. it doesn't make sense that he got 45 years for that. He was clearly sentenced for another crime that he was found innocent of by a jury of his peers. So I find that rather unfair. And I think O.J. should be released and be a free man.
Eric Helms wants to know, is there a joke you have that you never care if it works, a joke just for you? And he's from Cleveland.
Oh, Eric asks, is there a joke that I don't care if it works, it's only for me? Well, I would say every joke that I have, I don't care if it works. Every joke I have is only for me. I mean, I you know, they always work. So I'm not a fan of any joke that doesn't work, I would say. No.
Jonathan Levin wants to know, what is your favorite Chris Farley memory?
Jonathan wants to know my favorite Chris Farley memory. Well, there were so many with Chris. He was such a big, radiant man, you know. I remember one time, I guess I remember eating with him mostly because he would eat at such a voracious rate. And, you know, so he would order, we went to a place called Wally and Joseph's that was very near Saturday Night Live. And the waiter would always think he was joking, you know, until they finally figured out Chris had a big appetite. So Chris would order 2 steaks, and he would cut them up. He would put a big piece of butter on each piece of steak as he ate them. And as he was eating them, then he would order what he called his entree. The 2 giant steaks were just an appetizer for Chris. And then all manner of food would come out because he would order different dishes, like 3 or 4 different dishes. Pork chops, lamb, a Salisbury steak, a couple of grilled cheese sandwiches. This would constitute a meal for Chris. And the rest of us, of course, just ate an ordinary man's amount of food. And yet Chris could beat us, and he would be ordering dessert as we were still finishing our measly ham steak and eggs.
Rishi Karim has read your book and asks, is it true that you slept in the park in New York when you first moved there?
Rishi Karim asks, is it true that I slept in Central Park when I first moved there? Yes, that is true. I went to New York City and had no place to live, so I decided to live in the Central Park right near the zoo. And I thought that would be a good place because Central Park at night is filled with wandering, you know, dangerous people, you know, that will take your life for a handful of change. And so I felt that if I slept near the polar bear cage, I would be safe. I don't know why, because of course the cage, you know, was there, and so no one was really afraid of the polar bears. But how it did work is no one that was in Central Park, none of these dangerous people that made their way through Central Park at night, wilding the evening away, would ever think to go to the zoo.
This is a USA Today question.
USA Today question.
How do you feel about the rise of fake news shows, specifically current offerings like John Oliver's, Samantha Bee's, Trevor Noah's, and who do you think is doing it best right now?
How do I feel about the new news shows? Is the question. The mock send-up of news shows, the satirists, as they're improperly called, the funny men that talk about the current affairs of the day. Well, who can tell who is best? They're all entertaining in their own way. My favorite is because John takes subjects that I don't know about, and for a half hour he explores one subject. And so it would be something like net neutrality or something like that, which you people might know because you know how to somehow get into USA Today's Facebook page. But I don't know anything about net neutrality. I'm just a guy. So John Oliver not only makes fun, but informs me before he makes fun of what he's informing me about. So he's my favorite.
We have one last question.
The final question.
From Tristan Reynolds.
Comes from Tristan Reynolds.
Reynolds. What is your best or favorite moment professionally?
From what?
What is your best or favorite moment professionally?
Tristan asks, what is my best or favorite moment professionally? Well, Tristan, I always wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And I always thought I wanted to be on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson because I moved to Los Angeles when Johnny Carson announced that he was going to retire from network television. And I got there, and I didn't get on the show. But thank God for unanswered dreams, because it turned out that I didn't even like Johnny Carson. He wasn't really of my generation, and I just took it on faith that he was funny, and I just found him to be a corny old guy. My hero was David Letterman, and it turned out I went to New York, where I lived near the polar bear in the Central Park Zoo, and I got on the David Letterman show, and by golly, that was what I always wanted, you know. And when I got it, I thought, okay, that's it, I'm fine. And so everything after that, I never put any thought into. A lot of my friends had everything mapped out. Even at Saturday Night Live, they would be, what's next? What's next? They'd always have one foot out the door. But not me. I always have both feet right on the floor, living in the moment, and never thinking of the future. But the greatest moment I ever had was standing on the floor of Late Night with David Letterman at 12:30 p.m. and hearing a great man behind me laughing. Tristan.
Well, USA Today would just like to jump on that and ask, what was it like to be asked by Letterman to do the final stand-up tribute before his show ended?
Okay. Well, Tristan, it turns out your question was the penultimate question. The final question comes from USA Today, and it is a jump-on question, what we call a jump-on question here on the computer. What was it like, USA Today asks, to be asked to be on David Letterman's show as the final stand-up comedian? Well, the way it occurred was this. I did what I thought was my final David Letterman appearance. I always did panel with him. Panel means that you sit down beside him on the chair and you talk with him, and you each try to be as funny as you can, and everyone has a jolly old time. So that was 4 weeks before he retired. Then came a phone call. David Letterman wanted me to perform the final stand-up set ever on his television show. Now, I was greatly affected by this, and I'm sure a lot of comedians hated that idea because, you know, if you're Jerry Seinfeld or something, you're like, whoa, what? So that made me happy, and I decided that I would come up with the funniest 5 minutes that I could possibly come up with to make the final set on the David Letterman show the best 5 minutes that there could possibly be. I knew that Dylan was going to be doing a standard, you know, so I wanted it to live up to that. And so USA Today, with your jump-on question, that's how it happened, and I was very honored to have done that.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, USA Today, and thank you to everybody out there looking at their computers.